To understand the modern educational system, we are going to document the systemic shifts in child development theory between the years 1660 and 1850. The core premise of this analysis is that pedagogical frameworks do not arise from a vacuum of pure philosophy. The concept of childhood education relies entirely upon a society first crossing specific macroeconomic and mortality thresholds. This chart visualizes the stark demographic reality of the pre-industrial world in the 1660s. Historical evidence indicates that as many as 30% of all children died before they reached 14 days of age. With child loss serving as a commonplace event, parents constructed a specific behavioral framework. They protected themselves from the emotional consequences of death by refusing to make emotional commitments to infants. This necessary detachment manifested in daily life. Mothers would routinely refer to a newborn infant as it, leave dying babies in gutters, or record the death of a child in the same written paragraph as a reference to household pickles. When parents fully expect to bury a large fraction of their offspring, long-term cognitive investment is nearly impossible. This baseline of required emotional detachment meant that a dedicated educational philosophy for early childhood was a literal impossibility in the pre-industrial era. By the 18th century, the Western world underwent a massive socioeconomic transition, migrating from an agrarian economy based on farming to an increasingly urban industrial one. As families moved to cities, the social support networks of smaller rural communities collapsed. The immediate result was a sharp increase in the rates of poverty, crime, disease, and substandard housing. Within this newly precarious urban landscape, the economic function of children shifted. They were required to secure early employment simply to generate additional income and keep their families afloat. Looking at this photographic evidence from industrial settings, we can see the scale of this labor force. Children as young as 7 years old were mandated to work full-time jobs. These children operated in highly unpleasant, dangerous, and unhealthy circumstances, with labor roles ranging from factory floor positions to prostitution. While economically strong nations have largely eliminated this extreme labor expectation, the practice of childhood employment remains a structural staple in many undeveloped regions today. Urban industrialization stripped away the agrarian family unit and replaced it with a system that classified children as economic assets. They were wage earners, not individuals requiring cognitive development. Over the course of the 1800s, the geographic focus moves to the United States. Rapid technological advancements during the mid-19th century created a distinct middle class, which in turn triggered a redefinition of the roles assigned to individual family members. This layout illustrates the era's critical divergence. Work and home became physically separated. With manual labor removed from the domestic space, children were freed from daily toil. Middle-class parents began purchasing dedicated consumer goods for their children, like toys and books. It is within this redefined family dynamic that the writings of philosopher John Locke gained significant traction, particularly in America. Locke constructed an environmental position on human development, arguing that a child's mind is shaped by their surroundings and sensory experiences. By articulating this framework, Locke became known as the father of British empiricism, providing the conceptual basis for modern learning theory. Locke's theories required a controlled environment to function. The physical separation of domestic home life from industrial labor provided the prerequisite space needed for these theories of environmental learning to actually be applied. This flowchart tracks Rousseau's 1762 model. Humans begin innocent, but are corrupted by society. He identified that children possess age-specific characteristics requiring tailored instruction. Later, Pestalozzi added that an emotionally healthy, home-like environment must form a protective barrier before academic instruction begins. These philosophical models sounded highly logical on paper, but in the year 1800, a small town in southern France provided a hard empirical test of these ideals. Locals captured a feral boy, believed to be 11 or 12 years old, who had been foraging naked in the woods. Named Victor, the boy was entirely mute and had developed in total isolation. A physician named Jean-Marc Gaspard Itard took custody of Victor. Equipped with government funding, Itard initiated a rigorous 5-year education plan designed to civilize the boy and teach him to speak. The experiment failed. Despite 5 years of intensive labor and a carefully constructed home environment, Victor never acquired the basics of speech. Victor's inability to integrate proved a hard limit in developmental psychology. Philosophical ideals about natural innocence and supportive environments were insufficient if a child missed the crucial windows for structured developmental intervention. Recognizing the limits of pure observation, a German educator named Friedrich Froebel introduced a new approach in 1840. Froebel called his new educational framework the kindergarten, literally translating to the children's garden. Froebel's methodology operated on a strict rule. Identifying stages of child development was not enough. The actual education had to be rigidly geared to those specific biological stages. The operational mechanism he chose to execute this system was the use of guided, structured play. In Froebel's model, play was not a distraction. It functioned as the primary tool for a child to grow emotionally and build a tangible sense of self-worth. Implementing this environment required a radical personnel shift for the time. Froebel specifically designated women as the most appropriate educators to manage this highly structured developmental phase. Froebel took Rousseau's stages and Pestalozzi's requirement for a supportive environment and synthesized them into a repeatable, systemic institution. Over the 190-year trajectory from 1660 to 1850, the structural understanding of human development underwent a complete inversion. We began with a society where high mortality forced parents into emotional detachment, and where industrialization treated children purely as expendable economic labor. We conclude with childhood firmly established as a distinct, highly protected period of life that requires specialized, scientifically informed pedagogy to navigate successfully. The progression reveals a clear hierarchy of needs. Humanity's ability to nurture the mind is predicated on first surviving the physical and economic realities of the era. This video is brought to you by the IELTS FOCUS 0847705973, an English center specializing in IELTS preparation.